Imagine your organization just spent, $15,000 on this absolutely state-of-the-art piece of aviation technology.
Oh, yeah. The really high-end stuff.
Exactly. So the shipping box arrives, right? And inside is this beautiful, rugged, hard case. Everyone in the office is gathering around to look at it. The leadership team is just thrilled, taking pictures.
Top of the latches on the case.
Right. But then, fast forward about 3 months, and that very same piece of cutting-edge tech is sitting on a shelf in a supply closet.
Gathering dust.
Just gathering dust right next to, the spare printer toner and a giant stack of sticky notes. And today, on the Red Raven UAS podcast, we are looking at exactly why that happens over and over again.
It is, unfortunately, incredibly common.
It really is. We are diving into the true and honestly often hidden economics of starting an organizational drone program.
We're here to help you navigate the pretty complex world of unmanned aerial systems.
Mm-hmm.
At Red Raven, we work with public safety, utilities, and enterprise teams.
Mm-hmm.
And our focus is really on one thing, helping you launch and grow a drone program that's safe, compliant, and actually ready for your mission. We do the consulting, the strategy, and the hands-on training that turns an idea into a real operational tool. The insights we're covering today are drawn directly from the field materials and consulting frameworks built right here at Red Raven.
And you can find all their training philosophies and resources over at redravenuas.com.
I mean, between the entire team here, we've trained over 500 operators.
Which is a huge sample size.
It really is. Public safety, utilities, corporate enterprise, you name it. And honestly, it's given us a front row seat to what I can only describe as a financial bloodbath.
A bloodbath.
Yeah.
That's a strong word, but accurate, right?
Totally accurate.
Yeah.
We watch companies make the exact same expensive mistakes repeatedly.
Mm.
And the core takeaway that we try to drill into our clients is super counterintuitive.
Which is that buying the actual hardware, like the physical drone itself, is the absolute easiest and cheapest part of the entire process.
Exactly. The hardware is basically just the cover charge. It's the price of admission to enter a very, very complex operational environment. So to understand why a budget isn't just, a shopping list for an aircraft, we really have to look at that scenario you opened with. Here at Red Raven, we actually have a name for it. We call it the supply closet problem.
The supply closet problem. I love that.
Yeah, because leadership approves a purchase order for a shiny new drone, right?
Yeah.
They see the marketing videos, they see the potential.
Certainly they want the aerial shots.
Exactly. But they completely fail to ensure anyone is legally certified to fly it. And they definitely don't establish standard operating procedures for when and where it can actually be deployed.
So because there's absolutely no framework in place, no one actually knows how to legally or safely put it in the air?
Right. They approved a hardware purchase, but they entirely failed to approve a program.
And that distinction, hardware versus program, that is the critical dividing line between, success and just a total waste of capital.
Absolutely.
And I really want to highlight an analogy from our materials that I think explains this perfectly, the fire engine analogy.
Oh, yeah. That's a favorite of ours.
Because it just clicks, right? Like buying a fire engine does not mean you instantly possess a firefighting program.
Not at all.
You can go out today, spend $1 million on a gorgeous fire engine, and just park it in your corporate driveway.
Yeah.
But without trained crews who actually know how to operate the pumps.
And a dedicated mechanic.
Right. And without dispatch protocols to tell the truck where to go or a logistical plan for your water supply, you don't have a fire department. You just own a very big, very red, very expensive truck.
That's exactly it. And drones operate on that exact same logic. The aircraft is merely the physical manifestation of a much broader ecosystem.
The tip of the spear.
Yeah, exactly. You need people, you need policies, secure software, daily workflows, and sustainment budgets just to make that machine do its job.
So once an organization actually accepts that the drone is just one piece of this massive puzzle, we have to break down where the rest of the budget is actually going.
And this is where the numbers are a huge wake-up call for most organizations.
Because an enterprise-grade drone is generally going to cost, between $1,500 and $15,000?
Roughly, yes. Depending on the payload and the specs.
Which is a substantial capital outlay for any department.
It is. But here is the staggering part. That initial hardware purchase, it only represents 20 to 30% of the total first-year cost of a functional program.
Okay, wait. I'm looking at those numbers, and if I spend, say, $10,000 on a really high-end enterprise quadcopter,
right,
and that is only 20% of my budget, where on earth is the other $40,000 going in year one?
That's a fair question.
Because, I mean, I've seen the advertisements for drone certification prep courses. They are roughly $100 online. How can the operational setup possibly eat up the remaining 80% of the budget?
And that assumption right there, that is exactly where most internal budget proposals completely fall apart.
Really? Just assuming training is cheap.
Yeah, because you are absolutely correct about those online prep courses. The baseline legal requirement to fly a drone commercially in the U.S. is the FAA's Part 107 certification.
Right. The federal license.
Exactly. And getting an employee registered for that federal exam will run about $200 per pilot.
And you are legally cleared to fly.
Legally cleared, yes. Operationally capable. Not even close.
Oh, interesting. What's the difference?
Well, the FAA Part 107 certificate is essentially a multiple choice test. It proves you understand airspace classifications, how to read a complicated aviation weather report, and, where you are legally forbidden to fly.
Okay.
But it does not teach you how to physically manipulate the flight sticks. It certainly doesn't teach you how to fly safely in a complex, high-stakes environment.
I mean, memorizing federal airspace maps doesn't mean you know how to hold a drone steady when, say, a 20-mile-per-hour crosswind hits you while you're hovering near high-voltage power lines.
If you are a utility company inspecting infrastructure or a police department doing a search and rescue operation at night.
High-stress situation.
Very high stress. A written test does not prepare your pilots for thermal dynamics, electromagnetic interference, or emergency evasive maneuvers.
It's just textbook theory.
Exactly. That's why we emphasize that you need mission-specific, hands-on, on-site training. And that kind of specialized instruction, that costs between $3,000 and $15,000.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive difference. You go from a $100 multiple choice test to basically a $15,000 tactical flight academy.
Right. And we are still just talking about training the pilot. We haven't even touched program development yet. Well, going back to your fire engine analogy, you need the rule book. You need comprehensive standard operating procedures, or SOPs. You need a clear chain of command, detailed risk assessments, and rigid maintenance schedules.
And I'm guessing most companies don't just have that lying around.
Definitely not. Unless an organization already has an internal aviation department, they usually have to bring in consulting experts to build this operational playbook from scratch.
And what does that run?
That typically runs another $5,000 to $25,000.
$25,000 just to write the rules. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know what people are thinking.
Go for it.
What happens if a department head looks at that consulting fee and just decides to skip it? They say, look, we have smart people here. We'll write a few safety rules on a whiteboard. We'll assign the drone to Kevin in marketing, and we'll just start flying.
I love that you brought up Kevin in marketing, because skipping that foundational program development is exactly how fleets end up grounded indefinitely.
Really? It just stops the whole program.
We have watched this exact scenario play out so many times. A team bypasses the SOPs to save a few bucks, and they just start flying. And because they have no operational guidelines, a pilot inevitably makes a mistake. They fly over a crowd of people, or they enter restricted airspace without authorization.
Basically committing a massive FAA compliance violation.
Exactly. And the moment that happens, the organization's liability insurance gets immediately revoked. And then the corporate legal department forcibly shuts the entire program down.
Oh, wow. So they just pull the plug entirely.
Completely. So you are going to pay for program development one way or another. You either pay for it up front in consulting fees, or you pay for it on the back end in federal fines, lawsuits, and confiscated equipment.
So the rule book is quite literally just as important as the remote control. You cannot afford to fly without it.
You really can't. And just rounding out that initial cost breakdown, you also have to account for software and data management.
Because the drone is capturing stuff.
Right. Drones are basically just flying hard drives. They collect massive amounts of data. So you need flight planning software, photogrammetry tools to process 3D maps, and highly secure cloud storage.
And that's a recurring cost, I assume.
Yeah. That will run an organization another $1,000 to $5,000 annually. And then on top of that, you have ongoing operational costs. Batteries constantly degrade and require replacement.
Props get chipped.
Exactly. Props break. And you need annual aviation liability insurance. So those ongoing sustainment costs, 15 to 25% of your initial hardware price every single year.
Man, summarizing that true cost is actually pretty sobering. You buy the aircraft, but your budget just gets instantly consumed by tactical flight training, operational consultants, annual software subscriptions, and constant battery replacements.
Which is why we say the physical drone is simply the cheapest piece of a very expensive pie.
And, those operational costs make logical sense once you explain the mechanism behind them. But Red Raven also highlight 5 completely hidden costs.
Yeah, the silent budget killers.
Right. These aren't the obvious things like batteries or software. These are the drains that catch organizations entirely off guard.
And these hidden costs are usually what cause absolute panic in an accounting department about 6 months into a deployment.
Walk us through them. What's the first one?
The first one is legal and compliance reviews. You have to remember, you are essentially putting a highly mobile, high-definition surveillance camera up in the sky.
That is a terrifying way to phrase it, but very true.
It is. So what happens if your municipal drone accidentally films a civilian's backyard? Or what happens when a local news station submits a public records request demanding all your flight logs and video data?
Oh, man. You definitely don't want to be making up your privacy policy after a journalist is already asking for your hard drives.
Never. Having attorneys draft rock-solid privacy policies and manage data retention protocols, that costs between $2,000 and $10,000.
Just in legal fees. Okay, what's the second hidden cost?
The second one is that liability insurance we briefly mentioned earlier. General corporate policies rarely cover aviation accidents, so specific drone insurance is absolutely mandatory, yet it's frequently left off the initial budget proposal.
Because they just assume they're already covered.
Exactly. Now, the third hidden cost is replacement and redundancy.
Ah, yes. The military philosophy. 2 is 1 and 1 is none.
Exactly that. A single drone represents a single point of failure for your entire program.
Because things break.
Things break or software glitches. If your one aircraft forces a mandatory firmware update while you are literally standing in the field, or if a motor burns out and the unit has to be shipped away for maintenance,
your program is just dead in the water.
it ceases to exist for 3 weeks. And if you are a police department or a critical infrastructure team, you cannot tell an emergency to just, wait for your drone to return from the repair shop.
Right. Hold the fire. Our drone is in the shop. That doesn't work.
It doesn't. You have to buy backup equipment.
Which means basically doubling your hardware costs right out of the gate if you want actual reliability.
Pretty much. Then, the fourth hidden cost involves facility infrastructure. You cannot just plug these massive enterprise drone batteries into a standard wall outlet in a fabric cubicle.
Fire hazard.
Massive fire hazard. You need heavy-duty, fire-safe charging stations, secure storage lockers, and ruggedized deployment kits for the vehicles.
Wow. Okay, but out of all these hidden costs, the fifth one, detailed in our sources, is the one that strikes me as the most insidious.
Because it's invisible.
Right, because it isn't a piece of equipment or a legal fee, it is staff time.
The human element. It gets overlooked every single time.
We point out that organizations consistently fail to account for the 5 to 10 hours per week required simply for program management.
Yeah.
And just think about how unfair this is from an employee's perspective. Leadership buys a drone, they tap a mid-level manager on the shoulder. Let's go back to Kevin in marketing, and they say, "Congratulations, Kevin. You are the new drone program manager."
Good luck, Kevin.
Right. But they don't take any of his previous responsibilities away. They just magically expect him to find 10 extra hours a week to audit flight logs, run firmware updates, cycle the batteries, and track pilot certifications, all on top of his existing workload.
And that dynamic is the exact mechanism of how programs actually fail in the real world.
Because they don't fail in some spectacular crash.
Rarely. They almost never end in a spectacular, fiery crash on the evening news. They die quietly.
Just slowly fade away.
Yeah. An employee gets completely overwhelmed by the invisible workload. Nobody officially owns the program with dedicated budgeted hours. So the routine maintenance drifts.
The batteries go bad.
Oh, yeah. The expensive batteries are left fully charged in a hot car trunk until they swell up and die. The pilot's FAA certifications lapse. And eventually, the drone just ends up shoved back into that supply closet.
It is the quiet death of a technological initiative. And, anyone listening right now who works in procurement or management is probably screaming at their dashboard saying, just bypass all of this. Go to an electronics store, buy a $500 consumer drone, and figure it out as you go.
The famous cheap option.
Right. Why is that such a terrible idea?
The temptation to cut corners is powerful. We call it the cheap option trap. And it sets off a very, very predictable cascade of failure.
Walk me through the cascade. What happens when an agency tries to start small with consumer-grade equipment?
Okay, first, a $500 consumer drone is built for taking vacation photos in perfect weather. It cannot handle real-world operational environments.
Right, it's too fragile.
Yeah. A minor gust of wind comes through, the tiny motors can't stabilize the craft, and the drone is blown completely off its flight path.
So it's essentially a plastic toy trying to do heavy industrial work.
Basically. Second, the sensors are fundamentally inadequate. You cannot conduct accurate thermal imaging of a burning roof or create millimeter-precise 3D models of a construction site with a tiny consumer lens.
It just doesn't have the data resolution.
Not at all. Third, because the organization wanted to save money, they probably had an intern watch a few online tutorials instead of getting their real FAA Part 107 certification.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Which means
every single time that drone lifts off the ground, it is an illegal commercial operation. It exposes the entire company to massive federal fines.
And without the tactical training we talked about, they have absolutely zero muscle memory for what to do when something actually goes wrong.
Exactly. Which leads to the final step in the cascade. Within 2 months, the pilot encounters a radio interference issue they don't understand, panic sets in, and the drone crashes straight into a building.
Game over.
Game over. Leadership looks at the shattered plastic on the ground and confidently declares, well, we tried. Drones just don't work for our industry.
And that is the ultimate tragedy of the cheap option. Red Raven's analysis highlights that when you go cheap, you don't just pay for the drone twice, once for the cheap one that breaks, and again when you finally buy the correct enterprise equipment.
No, you do something much, much worse.
You burn through the organization's willingness to ever invest in that technology again.
You destroy the internal political capital required to innovate. Most programs do not fail because the technology itself is flawed. They fail because no one owned them, no one trained for the actual mission, and no one planned a budget for day 2.
So if the cheap route leads to federal fines and shattered plastic, and the expensive route is littered with hidden traps and legal fees, how does a department actually build a realistic budget that won't get them laughed right out of the boardroom?
It requires looking at honest, real-world numbers and understanding the tiers of operation. Here at Red Raven, we break a Year 1 program into 3 realistic financial categories.
Okay, what's the first tier?
First is the starter tier. This is for a localized, basic program, maybe a small construction firm doing site photos.
Yeah.
That will run between $5,000 and $15,000 for Year 1.
Okay, that seems like a pretty grounded, manageable number for a small footprint.
It is. It's totally doable. Next is the public safety tier. This is for police, fire departments, or emergency management.
The stakes are higher there.
Much higher. Because they absolutely require specialized thermal sensors, robust tactical training, and 24/7 operational reliability, this tier jumps to between $20,000 and $60,000.
A significant jump, but entirely justified when lives and public property are on the line.
Absolutely. And finally, the enterprise tier. This covers large utility companies inspecting hundreds of miles of power lines, state agencies, or massive corporate fleets.
That sounds expensive.
You are looking at an initial outlay of anywhere from $75,000 to well over $150,000.
Wow.
But, and this is critical, the most important number in this entire framework applies to all 3 tiers. Year 2 and every year beyond will consistently cost 30 to 50% of your initial investment.
30 to 50% every year.
Yes. That covers software renewals, replacement batteries, equipment maintenance, and recurrent pilot training.
So if you walk into a budget meeting and only present the year 1 costs, you are actively setting your organization up for failure. You have to clearly forecast that ongoing 30 to 50% sustainment cost, or the program will literally go bankrupt in month 13.
Presenting the whole picture is the only way to survive long term.
There is a massive psychological trap I see people falling into here, and it honestly happens across all industries, not just aviation. People love trade shows.
Oh, they love them.
They love walking onto a convention floor, finding the biggest, sleekest, most futuristic piece of hardware, pointing at it and saying, "We need that." They buy the platform first, and then they bring it back to the office and try to invent a reason to use it.
It is entirely backward logic.
Yeah.
And it is the fastest way to end up with the supply closet problem we started with.
Right. So how do we fix that?
To combat this, we introduce a methodology we call budgeting backwards.
Budgeting backwards. How does that framework actually function in practice?
It's a process built on forcing an organization to answer 8 critical questions before a single dollar is spent. The absolute golden rule of this framework is that platform selection, the act of actually picking the physical drone, must be the very last step you take.
So you completely ignore the hardware catalogs until the very end.
Completely ignore them.
What are the questions you have to wrestle with first?
You start by deeply defining the mission. What exact problem are you trying to solve? Are you mapping 100-acre agricultural fields, or are you flying inside a dark, collapsed structure looking for survivors?
Because those require completely different tools.
Exactly. Defining the mission immediately filters out 90% of the hardware on the market. If you are doing search and rescue, you must have a drone with thermal imaging and obstacle avoidance.
So the mission dictates the payload. What next?
Next, you determine who is going to fly it and whether they are properly certified. Then you establish who owns the program, whose annual performance review is directly tied to the success or failure of this initiative.
That ensures accountability. You ensure someone actually has the dedicated hours to manage it, avoiding that quiet death of the program.
Exactly. You don't just dump it on Kevin. Then you move to the operational structure. What standard operating procedures need to be codified before day one? Following that, you have to map out the data workflow.
Let's pause on data workflow for a second, because that sounds a bit abstract. What does that actually look like in practice?
Sure. Imagine a drone captures 50 gigabytes of high-resolution 3D mapping data of a new commercial development.
That's a huge file.
Massive. How does that massive file get from the physical SD card inside the drone, securely uploaded into a cloud environment, processed by photogrammetry software, and delivered to the lead engineer's tablet without violating the company's IT security protocols?
Oh, I see. You have to map that entire pipeline.
You have to. Because if you don't map that pipeline, the drone collects amazing data that nobody can actually see or use.
Which makes the whole flight pointless.
Exactly. Now, the final questions deal with sustainment. What is your annual budget for maintenance and software? What is your operational backup plan when the primary drone inevitably goes down for repairs?
Right.
And finally, only after answering all of those questions do you ask, are we absolutely sure about the drone platform we are choosing, or are we just hypnotized by a really slick vendor demo?
Vendor demos are incredibly dangerous. They are staged under perfect, ideal conditions.
Perfect lighting, no wind.
Right. They never show you the tablet crashing or the firmware failing to update while you are standing in a muddy field in 30-degree weather.
They are designed to sell hardware, not programs. But if you utilize the budget backwards approach, if you rigorously define your mission, assign clear personnel accountability, establish your data pipeline, and secure your sustainment funding, the correct drone platform will organically reveal itself to you.
The operational requirements will dictate the purchase. You know, the core lesson here is profound. The real cost of a drone program isn't the aircraft. The hardware is just the tip of a massive operational spear. The true cost, and honestly the true value, resides in the comprehensive ecosystem of tactical training, legal policy, data workflows, and ongoing sustainment.
That ecosystem is what makes the hardware legally compliant, operationally useful, and deeply trusted by your organization.
Because if you are only budgeting for the physical hardware, you aren't building an aviation program. You are just purchasing a highly complex paperweight.
A very expensive paperweight.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with today. We have spent this entire episode exploring the economics of drones. But consider your own workplace. Look around your department or your organization. What other shiny, disruptive technologies are being purchased right now without a comprehensive program built around them?
It is a question that applies to nearly every sector of modern business.
Think about the massive rush toward generative AI. How many companies are hastily buying enterprise AI licenses for their staff right now without defining the standard operating procedures?
A lot of them.
They haven't trained their employees on data security, and they haven't determined who actually owns the AI integration pipeline. Are you risking your own multi-million-dollar supply closet problem in a completely different department?
The fire engine analogy applies everywhere.
It really does. You cannot just buy the tool and expect the workflow to magically invent itself. Thanks for listening to the Red Raven UAS podcast. Visit redravenuas.com for consulting, training, and FAA Part 107 certification, and check out the current special pricing on our Part 107 course.